Welcome back to another episode of Proposed Minimum Requirement. Today we're looking at Alloy from Horizon Forbidden West, a game at a very positive review from Steam that came out on March 21st this year. And for the minimum requirement, this one didn't require a really powerful CPU, so it's an i3-8100 or a Ryzen 3 1300X, 16GB of memory, and a GTX 1650 or AMD RX 5500 XT, and 150GB of storage. An additional note is said SSD space, whatever that means. Welcome to Response PC, I'm Dunk, let's game on. So for testing the current proposed minimum requirement, I want to say that I use the i5 4690 instead of the i3-8100 or the Ryzen 3 1300X, and the i5 4690 is just in between in general performance. So a little bit slower than the i3-8100 by about 5%, but about 2% faster than a Ryzen 3 1300X. Then the 16GB of memory and the GTX 1650 for the graphics. They didn't say at which resolution or graphic presets to put the game and at which FPS to expect. So the initial setting will be 1080p, the auto detect the settings for the GPU, which is mainly low settings, and playing in a random field, exploring and fighting some bot. We get an average of 45-46 FPS. This is highly playable since it's not a competition game, and I will also say that maybe even 30 FPS for this kind of game is acceptable. So 45 is highly acceptable, but we didn't reach any boss or settlement or city yet. I'm only like 15-20 minutes in game. For the PC resources, the GPU is at 97 to peg and using a mouse is 4GB of memory. For the CPU, we have 80 to 90. We almost pegged the CPU. And for the RAM, 16 GB seems to be a bit big because we're using 8.3 right now, at least for now. Now, arriving in the first settlement or city or ruin in this case, we get a drop in FPS in 12 to 13 FPS. This is just for the loading new assets that is there or new NPC. Once it's loaded, all the assets are loaded, we get an average of 37. We have a small drop in FPS. We're still over 30 FPS. And depending on the scene where you are in those ruin, you can reach a 50, sometimes 60 FPS. FPSing is quite unstable depending on where you're watching and where you're looking. GPU and CPU usage didn't change much. Now we reached at least the maximum VRAM of the GTX 1650, and for the memory we have a peak of 12GB of usage out of the 16. Then, just to try, because we don't know if it's 1080p or 720p, I drop at 720p and also put from very low to low settings. And in the settlement, in FPS term, we gain a little bit. At least in average, we get a 48 instead of 45, but we get a better visual beating low instead of very low from 1080p. And on top of that, when you reach a less dense part of this dwelling, you can achieve a 60 FPS, 54 to 60 FPS. And since most of the game through will be in the wild, expect to be in the high 50s. And you can also play a bit more with the settings, since I only tried the default setting, very low and low. You can play a bit more, maybe reach high settings if you want a better visual quality, and you're okay to play at 30 FPS. And that's all for Horizon Forbidden West. Thanks for come watching, and see you on the next one. And subscribe.